wrong, really. Oh, I've just got a warning that it's being recorded, but got it. Yeah, so again, you know, just to highlight, there's no right or wrong way. And I know what we're going to do now is run through 3 CVs. They're all completely fine and would absolutely warrant being sent to a school or organisation in application. But it's just looking at CVs from an outside perspective and thinking, how can we make it read a little bit better? Knowing that purely, you know, particularly in our industry in education, these CVs, they're not going to get sent directly to head of section, head of school. They're going to land first and foremost with HR. And so HR, they're not looking for the buzzwords that Jess and I talked about earlier about curriculums and spearheading different projects. What they're really looking for is your eligibility for visas, etc., where you are in the world, all these, you know, your education background. And so what we'll do with the 3 CVs is just run through exactly how they've done it and how I would give some constructive suggestions on perhaps formatting, how to, you know, moving things around so that when they do land with HR, that person is getting the information that they need, and when they are passed on to the education teams, the right information is lifted from them as well. So that's what we'll do. I think Jess and I made a note here about referees as well, and it's something that she mentioned earlier. From a recruiter perspective, you know, it is part of our due diligence before we're working with a teacher to almost get the references before we send them to a school. It doesn't always work like that. Time constraints, people having offers made from other schools, it sometimes does get a bit messy. My main piece of advice on that is to check that the referees that you're using, make sure that they are correct and that they're not going to get bounced back, or that they are still working email addresses. What we've had quite a lot as of recently is schools reaching out to somebody's references and that email address is no longer valid. So again, it's just delay. And, you know, particularly at this time of year when everybody is getting offers and time frames, it can get a little bit messy. So again, just on that point, it's just making sure that all the information in your CV is correct. Things like your Skype address, your email address. I have had it where someone's put the wrong email address on a CV, believe it or not. Sounds completely out of this world, but it does happen. It's typos, it's all these softwares that we're using. So again, just making sure that all the information is correct on there, and certainly for referees, because if you are offered a position, the next step is for that school to reach out to the referees, and the last thing you want is a delay. That person's moved on, the email bounces back. Okay, so Jaya, I believe you're in charge of these slides, or is it Jess?
Hi,
it's going to be Jess now.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Yeah. So we've got 3 CVs here that 3 teachers have very kindly sent to us. And as I say, you know, we're not necessarily going to pick them apart. It's not that at all. It's purely offering advice, and also for you to have the opportunity to see your potential peers' CVs and how they look. You know, and as I say, you know, I really want to stress there's no right or wrong way of doing it. So this is the first CV we have here for D Wicks. If we look first and foremost, obviously we've got an image there. It's a very professional image, probably one of the better ones that I've seen. We've got all the information there. We've got her name, we've got who she is. Underneath the photo there, we've got contact details. Jess, just scroll down, because I thought we'll just go through the full CV first, and then we'll go through it step by step. So yeah, we've got the profile, we've got the education, we've got a section for skills and specialisms, we've got work experience, again in the right chronological order there, and we've got the references at the back, so at the bottom there. So on first glances, I'm sure you'll all agree with me that it's very well displayed. You know, all the information there is really clear. There's lots of white space, which is hugely important, and there's a range of different fonts and text and all of that, so that it is very clear. If this comes into my inbox, the first thing that I look at again is the contact details. They're all there. We've got the phone, we've got the email address. Dee has also stated that she's a British citizen, also Taiwan resident. Again, you don't necessarily need to include that information on, but again, it is purely personal preference. One of the things that Jess and I noted a couple of days ago when we went through this is things like, particularly because of COVID at the moment, people are starting to put their current location on CVs. That's purely because things like COVID have made people being locked out of countries, Asia probably. So people are probably sometimes in the UK when actually they're working for a school, let's say in Myanmar, but they're not actually physically in Myanmar, but they're working at that school there, but they're actually in the UK. And these are little things on the back of COVID that have really kind of upset the balance, if you like, of the international and global world. So these are just extra things that we're seeing people include on the in that information section there. Things like spouses as well, dependents. Schools, ultimately they will need that information, but whether it's important from the get-go, not necessarily. Again, personal preference if you wanted to include that on there. If we look at DCB as well, the first thing that we can see is this section on the right hand side of professional registration, and then below that we've got education. Professional registration, different again from education. Education is probably the most important section that we need on there. Professional registration, probably I would regroup elsewhere within that CV. I would say that education is probably more important. So as a suggestion, I would probably switch those two around. And D has very cleverly just listed every degree, PGCE, everything that she's acquired there. So that would certainly fit quite nicely. So that would be a suggestion there. One of the other things that we could look at as well is on the left hand side, we've got a really lovely profile written by Dee, and we've got some really, excellent information there about this person that shows where they started off within their career, where they've been in the middle, and where they are now. It's really nice to have that image, if you like, being able to be read from the page, so that any kind of school or HR will be able to get a really nice impression of who this person is, and there's some really lovely conclusion written in there as well. It's just nice things, they talk about safer, healthier, happier, all these kind of words that schools use now, particularly in light of COVID, and well-being is also mentioned in there as well. So it's a really nice explanation. It shows the natural progression of this person's career. On the flip side, you could perhaps say it's quite lengthy, and whether or not that some of that text could potentially be used in a covering letter. Again, down to personal preference. For me, this person has had quite a long working history, so it does actually fit quite nicely and explains the progression. If we were to really look at the CV and who this person is, they've obviously started it here in the UK and Scotland. They've worked in social care, and then they've progressed into primary education. So it's nice to have that explanation of how they've got from A to B and how that came about. Jess, if we just scroll down a little bit to the bottom there, we've got another section that overlaps onto the 2 pages, which is fine, about skills and specialisms on the left there. And then on the right hand side, we have like the work experience. For me, the most important thing, aside of your contact details, education background, is where you are now, what role you are doing, and what achievements, what accomplishments you've had in that role. Because, that's what schools will be really looking for, and how they can adapt to use what current experience you have and how that could be used when in a new role or in a new school. So what's interesting how Dee has done it is that she has coupled a large section of information about her skills and specialisms. It includes like Jolly Phonics, it includes Seesaw, it includes events, things that she's ran for the school. But if you look at the work experience for her current role, it's actually quite small. And so what I would probably look at here for Dee is including some of the information in the skills and specialisms section and writing that up into the work experience for her current role. So we talk about events, and we all know that international schools love events. You know, it makes up a great part of the marketing and the community, you know. And so, you know, Dee has mentioned it here about being an events organizer, World Book Day, International Rights of the Child Day. You know, if we can put that into the current role and use some of that lovely positive language that Jess mentioned earlier, you know, introduced, spearheaded, led the events team, you know, all of that, I think that would be a really good suggestion here, because on the whole, you know, it's a really strong CV, but I think that the role, or her current role, just needs a little bit more explanation. I'm sure that, you know, having been at the school since 2017, coming up to, you know, 4 or 5 years, a lot will have been achieved in that. And I think that that's what schools will certainly be looking for. It's excellent that we've got the longevity and the commitment to that current school, but so much would have been achieved during her time there. And I think it's really important to get that across. And maybe, you know, keeping it on 2 pages, lift some of the information from that skills and specialist section and put it into your current role to really highlight what you've achieved, who you are as a person as well, and what other outside of the classroom, what you're going to get involved in. And again, it's about finding out, it comes from personality, isn't it? Obviously, this person has an interest in events. Schools will love that. They will jump on that. So let that be clear and let that come out is my suggestion there. Again, if we keep scrolling down, Jess, Dee has included all her work experience dating right back to July 2004, which is a long time. But the reason why I think it's quite relevant here is, again, it goes back and links quite nicely to her profile, that she's stating, you know, I first started off in social care. It's led me to education, and it just shows overall that this person is a caring, compassionate individual, which ultimately is what all teachers are. So I think it's all very nicely linked, and again, it just shows that you're relevant to the position that you're applying to. A few other notes as well that Jess and I talked about as well on looking at the CV is, you could look at, you know, even though there's quite a lot of white space, the text is quite small. I think in the profile it was 8. So, you know, even when I've printed it here, I can see that it's still quite small. So again, not necessarily taking information out, it's just having a look at how you could format that a little bit better to make it a little bit bigger, a bit easier to read. If you look right at the bottom here, you've got a lot of white space that's left over. So again, use those 2 full pages to get as much information in there as possible, whilst also being mindful of white space, etc. Again, Dee has included her references. It is personal preference, but if you are going to include them, please let them know that there are potentially schools that are going to connect with them and reach out and ask for a completed reference. And again, what I mentioned earlier, making sure that they're accurate and they're not going to get bounce backs. Again, just don't want those delays and any impact on the recruitment process in total. So all in all, thank you to Dee, whoever you are. I'm sure that's not your real name, but thank you for sharing the CV. Really lovely outlook. Reads really well. Again, just some few minor things to look at, but all in all the information is there. It's just about getting it where it needs to be, if that makes sense. So I think that was the first one. We've got some, we'll read the comments later and whatnot, but Jess, do you want to move on to the second CV?
Do you have the second one showing now? I've switched over.
Or no?
Because if it doesn't work, I'll stop sharing, go back in again.
I've still got the same one. I'm pretty sure
okay,
everyone
I'm
else.
going to stop sharing then, and I'll come back in. Okay, you see a different one now?
Yeah, we have.
Yeah,
okay, so this one, again, thank you to the person who's kindly shared it. And again, we're not being critical at all. It's just purely from a perspective from you know, how we can make sure that the right information is there, and that, you know, HR are first and foremost going to see it, and how you're best selling yourself. So if we first take a look at this, obviously you can see it's a very different approach to the first CV, and again, no right or wrong way of doing it, complete personal preference. At first glance, what I can't see is the name. Now, I don't know whether or not that's just because we ask these CVs to be confidential, so perhaps that is, but again, it's just making sure that at the very top you've got your name, your contact details, and any other personal information that you wish or wish not to include, if that makes sense. And again, it's about the picture. I'm sure it is a bit of a tongue-in-cheek image there, but again, you know, the importance of making sure that you do have a professional headshot. Just on Jess's notes, I know Jess really highlighted this earlier. I recruited from the UK a really specialist geography teacher who had a really great image of him climbing Mount Kilimanjaro. And I thought, you know, it's not your typical kind of professional headshot, but he is a geography teacher and it is showing that he does get out there. So, oh, I don't know, it swings and roundabouts, isn't it? But again, you know, that worked because it made that person lift off the CV and who he was, and he was obviously a huge geographer and hiking and out and about, so it did make sense. So again, you know, us saying about professional headshots, if it works, great. If you know, and that would be my advice. Again, we've got a different way of doing a kind of alternate profile, completely different to the one that we saw earlier. Some people like these images at the top that have all these kind of adjectives and, you know, descriptive words of who you are as an individual. I think in this world, it's probably best to have my personal preference is have a profile written by yourself that includes all of those words and exactly showed how you've done it. You know, it is quite easy to potentially just grab one of these images online, and the chances are that somebody else might have a similar image on their CV and that comes across the same person's desk. And again, it's so my advice would be just to make sure that you've got a really lovely kind of profile highlighting who you are. And again, we've got a couple of sentences here I think that could perhaps be a little bit elaborated on to include those adjectives above, just to really show that who you are as an individual. I think one of the things, if you just scroll down a little bit there, Jess, having looked at this, again, the thing that I see the most is the format. So we've got different texts, we've got different fonts, all of that. We've got the education later on at the bottom, and also the contact information. You know, so my advice on this one would be to perhaps review the text and the font size, making sure that everything is in line and everything adds up, and also making sure that, you know, you've got the right font size and all of that. And it just, you know, when it's being printed as well sometimes, because that's what some schools will do, that it does come out quite well and all the information is there. So this person, if you look at the whole CV, you will see that they're very EAL focused. They are very an international person. Jess, if you scroll right down to the bottom, you'll see that they've got qualifications from Europe, and they've worked in, you know, in Kiev, bachelor's degrees. They've worked in Vietnam. They're now in Taiwan. So they're, you know, very, very international. But we only get that impression once we get onto the second page. So it would be useful perhaps in that profile to state, you know, that this person is incredibly international, you know, they're very cultured. I think that would be really useful, particularly if they're EAL orientated, EAL centered. I think that really needs to lift off the page, and I think it would be useful if we did so. You know, there's that whole idea that having lived and worked in many cultures and countries, the idea of being passionate about languages, which is what EAL is all about effectively. So I think that would be a nice idea if that could be lifted from the page, most definitely. If we go back to, thank you, Jess, on the top page there. So, you know, they're at their school, they've been there since 2015. If this person is applying for August 2022, that's 7 years at the school. In that time, that person will have achieved and accomplished and done so much. And I think that that position there needs to be elaborated on quite a lot. You know, you've got to really be quite explanatory about what you've done, what curriculums, what year groups that person is working with, you know, what activities outside the classroom they would have worked with. You know, EAL in itself is so varied. There would have been so many opportunities to be innovative, to be creative. And I think that's what needs to be fleshed out a lot. You know, again, what we said about that first CV as well, it's about, you know, in your current role, that's what a school will be looking at and saying, what have they done in that role? And I think that this CV here would particularly benefit from that. 7 years is a long time. It shows amazing commitment and longevity to the school, but what have you done in that time there? So I think that really needs a little bit more information there, and selling yourself. And it's a really nice opportunity to use those positive the positive language that Jess mentioned earlier, what projects you've done, what events you've done, what year groups, all of this. So I think that would be a really nice opportunity there. Another point as well, if we scroll a little bit further down, Jess, you'll see that this CV's got some lovely borders and footers there. Again, if you want that, absolutely, why not? Keep it in there if you want it to flesh out the CV. We've also got logos like LinkedIn and Weebly. Again, it does brighten the CV up, but you could include that information in another part of the CV as well. And again, my suggestion here, we've only just got to the contact information right down at the bottom of the second page. My advice would be put that right at the top of the first page. If a school see your CV, get excited about you, you want them to be able to contact you as soon as possible. So having that access to you and your contact details, put it right on that first page would be my advice. And I know it's quite funny that this person here has used their name as Smart Pants Bossy Boots. Believe it or not, I do often see very strange Hotmail, Outlook email addresses. So, if we can make them as professional as possible. I have seen many colourful names, and it doesn't always come across. And I know that we created Hotmail addresses when we were 12, 13, and surely I've got rid of my one now. But if we can use professional addresses, that would be my suggestion as well. But all in all, this person, they're so EAL and cultured and well-travelled, I think that really needs to lift from the page. They've done, so much within the EAL career. I think that really needs to come from the page. Just the last note as well, Jess, if you just scroll up to the education and professional development, my suggestion there, obviously you've got your PGCE and your CELTA and your bachelor's degree. For me, that's different to your phonics training. So I think that section there needs to be separated into those two different categories and not pretty much lumped together. I think it would be my suggestion there to keep your education experience to what it is, as opposed to these professional development and other skills. And again, that kind of resonates with what we mentioned about Dee's CV as well there. Just keeping that information, because ultimately it's going to land on a HR representative's desk. They're going to check for eligibility for things like visas. Make that information as clear and concise as possibly can. I think we've got one more CV as well. I feel like I'm rushing, I'm sorry, but conscious of time. Thanks, Jess. So this is our third and final CV. For me, this is somebody, again, who's incredibly EAL focused. If we look, we've obviously got the name, their education. We can see from their educational background straight away that, EAL is the career focus. And again, it's nice to have obviously all the contact details at the top, education background. But again, to me, I just want, when we see a CV, we want to make it it's somebody I want to talk to. We want to make it not, I'm not saying that we need logos and colourful and this and that. It just needs to be, it's a bit overwhelming it's quite text heavy. And I know that kind of going against what we mentioned earlier about saying, try and include as much information as possible. But again, also being reflective of having white space as well. But for me, this could just benefit from a little bit more white space, and do be, increase the size of the name, the contact details, just to make it a little bit more different. Otherwise, it does just look like an essay as opposed to a CV. But again, the information is all there, and I think that's the best thing to do as well, is what we've got here: the name, contact details, background, education background, right in the right places. What's nice as well is that this person has just scroll down a little bit more. If we look at the professional experience, this person has been working at this same school since, I believe, 2018, and these are all the roles that this and responsibilities that that person has included. So having looked at that, you know, from a recruiter, and you know, given my experience working in schools as well, I see ESL teacher, I see art teacher, and I see PE and health teacher, and it's how do we connect the dots? So what I would suggest this person do here is that I think they probably would benefit from having a bit of an introductory profile, a bit of an introductory bio, just to say, you know, that this person obviously has experience not just in language acquisition, but also a background in art and PE as well. I think, you know, the dates in looking at the roles that this person has undertook whilst working at the same school, and I get it, you know, we're all asked to do additional things, but it's just making sure that the dates are they all add up and that they're all correct. You know, I think we have to really look at this and work out what roles they were doing at the same time. And if you're having to do that and really put a keen eye on it, then, you know, is a school going to do that, or HR going to do that? Otherwise, you just don't want to confuse them. So it just needs to be a little bit more clear, a little bit more concise. And I think that that's what would really be benefited. But they've used some lovely language here, you know, like collaborative, supported, communicated. And I think, you know, that's all what we've been asking people to do. So again, I think that that person just needs to benefit from bringing everything together and making it a little bit more concise and easier to read. And again, it would be making sure that you do have the correct dates on your CVs. I have seen people, you know, I've gone back and questioned and said, well, what did you do between 2017 and 18? And some people get defensive and say, well, I didn't take a year off. I said, well, just check your dates on your CV. And you know, they're mortified that they've been sending this CV off to schools with gaps in, and it's purely been a mistake. So it's like Jess mentioned, it's so important to get people outside of education even to look at your CV and check that things like dates add up. Things like spelling as well. The amount of times I see principal, principal, I can see it's written correctly here, but again, it's just having another set of eyes to read on it. I've highlighted again for this person here as an art teacher, developed art curriculum independently. Wow, that's quite a massive thing to do, but we can't just leave it as a single, you know, sentence. I think it would be really interesting to elaborate on these things, or at least pick the main accomplishments within that role. And again, you know, this person is hugely EAL focused. And I think that, again, you know, we talked about adding a profile. That would be the opportunity to explain your other interests, that there's obviously an art interest there as well, or, you know, PE, physical education. And yeah, so I think it would certainly benefit from that. This person has chose to keep off the references. Again, it depends on where you are with your recruitment. Some people are applying for jobs and haven't let their current school know that they're leaving. So again, they don't want the schools reaching out to them. And so again, it is personal preference, but it does sometimes speed up the process. So again, it's completely dependent on where you are with your recruitment process. But all in all, a really lovely EAL focused CV. This person's obviously got a lot to give. Let's just make sure that that lifts from the page. And again, it just looks like you're somebody that we want to speak to is what I'm getting at. So Jess, I feel like I've rambled, and I'm sorry if it's been information overload, but I hope
it's really helpful, and I'm afraid it's just the way it is because there's so much information, isn't there, to share. Exactly. I think I went really fast as well, so don't worry. Thank you for spending that time on each CV. I think it's really, really nice to see the actual CVs because we often don't look at each other's CVs, so how can we improve?
Exactly.
So yeah. So Jaya, if you wouldn't mind sharing the slides again, that would be fantastic. Don't worry, guys, as well, we will have questions. I know somebody raised their hands and there's some questions in the chat. We thought we'd just have a little chat from head teachers that are here right now, and then we'll go straight to questions. So we've managed to get a few. Who have we got in? I'm just double checking. We've got them in. So we've got Philip Wharton that's come in. He is a head at Independent Bond International School, and Gillian Smith, who's assistant head. I'm going to request they please unmute. And it would be lovely just to have their feedback on what's been said, and if they've got any other tips to add, and then we can just open up the questions.
Shall I start?
Yes, please. Hi, Philip. Thanks for joining us. You got in eventually.
I did. I'm so sorry I'm late. Hi, everybody.
No worries. It's not your fault. Thank you.
I had a few technical issues, but I'm here now. So hello from Cologne in Germany. Lovely to see everybody. Thanks so much for the, really interesting information about these CVs, and it was really fascinating to see a variety and different styles that are out there. I suppose just for me to keep it really, really brief, the things that I've been looking at when I receive CVs. I run recruitment at my school, as well as everything else, because it's quite a small school. So I receive a lot of CVs, and so I was thinking during the week about kind of distilling my own ideas about what I would look for when I receive those documents. So for me, the first thing that's important is a photo. That's my number one thing that I look at. It may sound very simplistic or too so basic, but for me, I want to see the person. The professional headshot is really important to me. And in all honesty, if I receive a CV without a photo, I would find it harder to look at that CV. I really kind of push myself to look at that CV if I'm not seeing a photo. So a headshot, very important. Brevity is also something I look for. So 1 page, maximum 2. No logos would be something that I would say, strongly advise people not to include is lots of logos and pretty borders, that kind of thing. I think, sort of something that's very clear, with white space as well. I think, Lydia, you were quite right when you said you don't want it to be too text heavy. You want it to be kind of easy on the eye as well. So something clear. I look at qualifications as a first kind of reference point when I'm looking through a CV. So I will look at your qualifications to make sure that your qualifications match the job that you are applying for, because you'll be amazed at how many people do apply for jobs when they don't have the right experience. So I look for the qualifications and then what you've been doing in your school or in your professional life that is relevant to the job that you're applying for. And those are the things that I would look for. So that's it from my side, if that's helpful.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Thank you, Philip. Over to Gillian. Gillian, do you have anything you'd like to add?
Hi everyone.
Hi, Gillian.
So much great information has already been shared. I've been checking through my notes to see what I can share on top of what's been shared. And I think that I'm a no photo person, and I think that just kind of highlights that different people look for different things. And so I agree with so much of kind of what's been said, particularly around being really clear with the information that you're sharing, because initially it's almost like a checklist for HR to go through and make sure that everything that is a requirement on that job description is in your CV. And I think just being careful with the words, as we've talked about, the words that you use, that stay away from all those fluffy words that don't really say anything, but they fill up lots of space on your CV. And really think about how your values will show through with what you prioritize and in your experiences and also professional development. I think also something that's not been mentioned is safeguarding, and safeguarding is a really important point in all international schools at the moment, and making sure that if you've got professional development in that area, that's something that you add on to your CV. Also, any accreditations that you've gone through, thinking about what is really helpful to me if I'm looking at a CV that helps me understand where you've come from and who you are. And I think as if you're writing a CV, use it as a stepping stone almost to interview, so that you're thinking about everything that you add in there, particularly in your current role. What examples can you share once you get to interview? Thinking through how you match the school, but also how the school matches you. But so much has already been shared. I'm not sure if I could add much more.
No, that's really helpful. Thank you so much, Gillian. Thank both of you for adding in your comments. They're really, really invaluable for us. And yeah, I get from that as well that every school is going to look for slightly different things in your CV. So I think just being true to yourself in your CV is you're going to get the school that suits you at the end of the day. Jaya, is it okay to go back to you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So questions, it's Q&A time. We are incredibly lucky. We have people from Taipei, Kaohsiung here in Taiwan. We have someone from New Zealand. We have people from Bangkok, UK, of course, Malaysia, Germany, Ireland. So this is a great gathering, and we have already got a few questions on the chat. So I'll get started with those. So we have 2 or 3 questions from Emmy. I hope I'm saying your name right. Would you like to unmute yourself and ask your questions?
Yes. Hi, everyone. My name is Emmy. You said it correctly. And thank you so much for hosting today's event. The first question I have is related to my background. I studied, I have a bachelor's and a master's in social studies related, social science related fields, but the bulk of my experience has been in teaching English. I would like to transition back to hopefully teach in the humanities or social science field. How can I market myself for that transition in my CV and my cover letter?
Hi, Emmy. I'm just going to jump in if that's okay.
Lydia, that's great.
I see a lot of this. I see particularly for primary teachers who want to move to PE. That's how I can, an example of something recently that I've been working on. And, you know, I've had a teacher who's been primary trained, classroom teacher, then wanting to move over into purely being a full mainstream PE teacher. And you know, we've been really helping him to guide the right information that he includes on his CV to show that. And it is purely as simple as including any relevant information as to how you've already been doing that in previous roles. And again, it's just, you know, things like, I know it's a different example, but, you know, for him, we've been making sure that he includes all his extracurricular activities have been related to PE, any extra courses that he's been able to do outside of his classroom teaching role as well, just to show that the initiative and the passion and the desire to move over into that field. You know, and even if at your current school, is there any clubs or activities or events that you can lead that demonstrate that desire to change into a different subject? I think that's how it's going to be. And I think that, you know, when you're applying for the first post within that new role, I think that, you know, you're going to have to demonstrate very clearly, using your own initiative, exactly what it is that you've done already, showing how, and your desire to move into that different stream. It's as simple as that. It really is the best advice that I can give you. But again, it's just being as active as possible and taking on you know, voluntary roles that reflect your desire to move over into that other specialist subject, if that makes sense.
It does. Thank you so much.
All right, so I think we'll move on to next question. Michelle, would you like to say your question out loud? Hi, Michelle.
Hi there, how are you? So
good, nice to see you.
Nice to see you. So you've encouraged us to really focus on what we do now and how amazing we are in the moment, but I feel like I was amazing like 10 years ago. And, you know, a few years ago, like my eldest son was had learning issues. I just kind of had to stop and, you know, can't do everything, kind of step back from coordination and leadership and head of this. So for the last probably 10 years, kind of just stepping back. Then COVID hit, you know, 2 kids really struggling, again, putting them first. So now I have 1 more year to get my second child through, you know, like A levels. And pay attention to him. So a year from now, I'll want to apply for a new job, probably completely change curriculum and go back to what I really say is what I enjoy or my favorite curriculum is NYP. But it just looks like I've done nothing with COVID lockdowns and, you know, family things first. So how do I spin this somehow in a resume or a cover letter?
Lydia, I think this might be you again.
Oh, Just Michelle, I'd love to sit and have a conversation with you because you just sound so fun, so full of vigor, and energy. And what all that you've said, looking after your family, these are, it's natural, we're human, all of these things. If possible, this is the aim of the game, isn't it? To just try and get everything onto that CV, those 2 pages. And it's the most difficult task. You've obviously achieved so much. And, COVID has produced the most interesting and irregular CVs over the last couple of years, and it will continue to do so as the global scene is disrupted as it has been. And I think that from a recruiter's perspective, we have to be understanding that people have been affected massively, in our personal lives and in our professional lives. And I think that CVs need to reflect that. Again, we're only human. And I think that you'll be able to write something very strong if you incorporate everything that you've just talked about there across those 2 pages, because it just shows the struggle that everybody's had. But you've also got that real grit about you, Michelle, that you want to get back into it. And I think that a lot of people do lack that these days. And if you've got that, then that really needs to come across. Michelle, I'd be really happy, just to get you on another call and just run through everything if that would be helpful. But, I think the main takeaway here is a lot of people will have difficulty writing their CVs after recent events. You're not alone. And I think that, perhaps that might be the topic for a spin-off webinar, just explaining gaps. And just on the back, someone else mentioned about, showing everything that they've done during COVID, the online learning that they've missed out on training. And again, that all needs to be incorporated. But schools, they will be understanding of that to a certain extent. But again, for you, Michelle, it's just getting everything on that page and making sure that, your energy, your enthusiasm comes across, because that's way worth its weight in gold than anything else.
Thank you.
Philip, thank you, Lydia.
Can I just,
Philip, would you like to add something? Yeah.
I want to add really quick, then I can see Philip does too. I want you to say that really the COVID situation has been a big deal, and the online learning has been a huge deal. So don't underestimate that. The fact that people had to go online so quickly, learn all the programs, especially if you didn't know how to use the programs, and then you're expected to develop yourself within that. It's hugely challenging, and homeschooling, if you had to do that too, incredibly challenging. I had to do that myself too. So I know, and both myself and my partner are teachers, and we had to do that. So really focus on that, your strengths more than anything, that you managed to do all of that. And you learned new skills. And a question I was asked in interview, which I thought was a good one, was, okay, you've done online learning, so how have you brought that into the classroom now? And yeah, I have, because I've started to use ICT in the classroom. I use iPads in the classroom. I know the children are more capable. I mean, they're only 4 and 5, the kids I teach, but they can use a program on an iPad, take photos, where before I would have really stayed away from those things. So you can just show how, if you were to go back into a classroom, then you've got all these skills to add to the classroom now. Yeah. And Philip's got his hand up. If you unmute, Philip.
Yeah, it was just to add to what you've said, and for Michelle, just from a head teacher's point of view, is just being honest. I think, Lydia, what you said about schools would appreciate what people have done, and that's completely true. And I think, Michelle, you said, how do I spin it? I wouldn't spin it, because a school would see that spin, if you see what I mean, and would wonder why you were spinning it. But if you're just honest, that's all we're looking for, and we would understand for sure.
Great. Just a reminder to everyone, please feel free to jump in. We are all experts. If you have been in a situation or know somebody, in a situation like that. So I think if nobody wants to volunteer to address this one, we have a couple more questions right here. We have one more from Michelle, but we'll get back to that. I love that question, Michelle. We'll go to Leah. Leah, you have a question?
So I'm currently at a starter school, and there have been many transitions in the leadership over the last 4 years that I've been with the company. So I'm struggling for references and observational feedback because of the lack of leadership at my school, but I have a lot of experience and different roles because of the starter school. I've spearheaded many things. So I'm just, what can I do about my lack of observational references?
Hi Leah, hope you're good. First of all, hats off for being at a starter school. I set up a school a couple of years ago in Shanghai and know the blood, sweat and tears effectively that goes into getting it off the ground and getting that school operational. So, you know, it's so important to let whoever it is that's reading your CV know that it is a starter school, because the experience from that is just incredibly unique, and everything that you learn from that, you know, it really does add into this idea of resilience and determination, because I know how tough it can be. And again, you know, I think this is something that Jess and I mentioned earlier about, you know, putting the size of the school or the age of the school if it is relevant. And in this case, I think it is, because perhaps if you're applying to schools within the same region, they will know that that's a new school. If you're applying to schools outside of that region, they're not going to know that it is a startup school. So if you are applying to schools within the same region, they will probably have an idea of the school, and if that school has experienced any issues, they will understand that, and that would perhaps explain the issue with the lack of observations and the issue with references. If you're applying to schools outside of the region, they won't have an idea of the school or the age of it or issues. You know, I think that you've just got to include as much information as possible, and any, you know, and I'm sure that Gillian and those in school positions will be able to understand that the intricacies of a startup school, it does, for me, it's 0 to 5 years or even more is the phase of what I would still consider a startup school. And so any, you know, experienced head or head of primary, head of section or whatever will understand the intricacies of that. So I wouldn't be too worried about, you know, the issue, but I would try and get your references you know, organized as possible. You know, even if you've got some really concrete ones from previous roles, I think that would help. We have this quite often, that people do struggle to get references from their current role. Sometimes they're unwilling to do it depending on the school, which is just completely baffling, but we come across it. So you're not on your own also is the issue there. You know, one of my main bugbears is references and chasing them and whatnot. So I wouldn't be too worried about that. For you, I think the main thing is to make sure that it lifts from the page of all the things that you've done whilst working at a startup school, because it is unique skills that you will have developed there most certainly.
Leah, do you have anyone that could observe you that's within your team or team leader or head of year?
Yes, I have. I currently am a team leader, and
brilliant.
I have other team members that can observe me from other grade levels, but they would be colleagues that are also team leaders in a different grade level.
It can sometimes just be helpful to have observations. I know you might not use them as referees, but for yourself, so you know what your key strengths are as well. Because I know with myself, like I did ask my my members of my team what they saw in me, and it was very different to how I would answer the question, like how do your colleagues see you? It's sometimes useful to have that information, but I agree with what Lydia said as well. So good luck. I think she's given you some great advice there. We've got hands up too, and I saw that Kim's got her hand up. Kim, would you like to unmute?
Yes, thank you so much. I appreciate the opportunity. I am making a midlife career transition from working in NGO educational leadership into teaching. And I saw brilliant examples of how to explain a resume gap for maternity leave. But right now I'm thinking about leaving my current position, which is at a not an international school, not one that requires a teaching license. But I'm thinking about stepping down from that so I can finish my education and finish my qualifications so that I can start applying within the international school network. So my question is, if I step down from my current position, I have a resume gap, but it's for the purpose of finishing my education, will that be a detriment to me, or how could I address that in a way that I could frame it more positively?
I'm happy to make a comment. I'm not the best expert. Lydia knows a lot about this stuff, as you might guess, but I did take a gap. Okay, it was for maternity leave, but of course it was 5 years. That's quite extensive. But during that time, I took on an MA at the same time, and that was in early years education. So I feel it's been really good for me. I also, at the same time as that, set up a business as well in what I wanted to do. And it was interesting when I went for my first interview, I was very nervous about that huge gap. The interviewer basically just kept asking about the business all the time. That's what amazed them. This small little business that I set up for, like 8-9 months. So personally, I thought it would be a big deal. I've also had friends that also took a year out or 2 years out and traveled and went back to school. So they just traveled with their kids and they were fine. They got into a tier 1 school. So I don't think it's such a concern in the international world because people do chop and change jobs quite a lot. People do take breaks, but your education isn't just, you're going for education. You're going to further yourself. It's a bit different than perhaps other people. Lydia, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, hi Kim, thanks for your comment. And it's true, people do have colourful CVs, it's life, that's what we're here doing it. And a lot of people go and work internationally to have the experiences to save and then go off travelling for months. I spoke to a teacher in Europe yesterday and was successful in getting a job, and then the school came back and said, hold on a minute, there's a gap here. And they loved the idea that she'd just lived off the grid in New Zealand for a year. All these experiences make you who you are. Just going back to COVID as well, I have seen people taking time out to look after sick relatives, all these things. It's life, we're human, these things happen, and I think that you do have to explain them on your CV. But I guess for yourself, Kim, there's no break. You're still being involved in full-time education by the sounds of it. And again, if you can just make that clear from things like dates and in your bio as what you're doing now, then I don't see any issue at all.
Thank you. That is incredibly helpful. I appreciate the guidance.
All right. We're going to move on to Dominique. Dominique, you had a question that you typed in. Would you like to address it to everyone?
Hi, yes, good afternoon. So within the next couple of years, I do plan to make the transition from a teacher role to a coordinator director role. But at this moment in my brief international career, I have not stayed beyond my initial contracts. So do you believe that this is something I should explicitly address within my CV or cover letter, or would it be better just to let my work and experience speak for itself? So basically, would that transparency and honesty truly be appreciated without trying to spin if that's brought up?
Hi, Dominique. Hope you're all good. There's, in my line of work, I see an awful lot of CVs, and I see people who've stayed 1 year here, 1 year there. And whilst it doesn't look the greatest thing for longevity, I think that, it's understanding that it is international education. It is quite transient. People move on. But if you are wanting to make the step up into leadership, a lot of people do come to me, particularly those who are from the UK and think of international education. It's easy to get a role and I want to go into leadership. We'll say, well, where is your leadership experience? I think my advice to you would be that you need to gain some sort in a current role and then use that for when you're applying positions. It is quite tricky to get into a good school on jumping straight into a leadership role. They do tend to want to see that experience having already been gained. And if you can do that, again, it's this comment that I mentioned earlier as well, any voluntary roles, just trying to flesh out your CV to show that you've got the skills and the grit and the determination to move up, then I think, that's what I would be doing. Again, trying to stay as long as possible in a school. And I get it, sometimes there's extenuating circumstances that don't make that possible. And that's not just the school, that's family reasons and everything with COVID, I understand. But, if we can stay and move and be able to progress within a school setting, that will look more favourable when you're applying to a new school who can see that you've been given and granted that opportunity within your current setting and moved up that way. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, because I would say I do have a pretty good range of experience that will prepare me for leadership. And right now I'm at a Tier 1 school.
Yes.
And so that helps as well, doing things on that end, but just really wondering how it looks for some people versus others.
You've just got to flesh it out and take on as many roles and opportunities that you possibly can to make it look, you know, this person's ready, this person can handle this role. You know, I think that's probably what it gets down to.
Thank you so much for that.
Thank you, Lydia, for addressing these questions. Thank you, Dominique and Leah and Kim for asking those excellent questions. Lena, do you have a question too?
Yes, hi.
Great, hi.
Perhaps you've addressed it and I missed it, but how long or how far back should the work experience section go? That's it.
A little bit earlier, I was saying approximately 10 years, but we were talking about how that can be really, that can't be everybody's, so it's your own personal journey. So for example, if I did 10 years, that would only include 2 schools. So I've gone back like 15 years. The important thing I think is everything that relates to teaching should be in there. So I wouldn't put like my previous data entry jobs and those kind of things before I qualified as a teacher. Lydia, do you want to add anything to that? What are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, I think that good question, you know, and it's one that really does help to make up a picture of who you are on this CV. But I think, you know, we just need to make sure that any work history is related to your current industry, you know, and I guess it depends on your age as well. You know, if we've got somebody that's newly qualified, then they won't perhaps have too much work history. So the temptation there is to include any, you know, I see a lot of like bar work whilst at university and things, and it's not, well, you know, I get it. It shows that you've worked at university and took the initiative. Brilliant. But it's not necessarily relevant to the role that you're applying for or the industry that you're working in. So go back, you know, as much as you see fit and what is relevant. And we looked at a CV earlier for Dee, who had gone working in social services and now working in education, and her work history went quite far back, but it showed that lovely progression, how she got from A to B. So I think to answer your question, it's purely personal preference, but it's just making sure that anything is relevant to the job and role that you're applying for, most definitely.
Yeah, a lot of it is so personalized. Yeah, my work experience goes back 21 years because, and I've skipped a few in between, but that shows a different country and a different role that I worked at, and I want to highlight that. So, so yeah, that was my first job. So yeah, a very individual. We have a couple more questions, but keep them coming if you have any. We are running out of time, but we will definitely address these 2 from Michelle. Michelle, you had one about job fairs and agencies, and then I see another one. So go ahead and ask both of them.
Well, I've gone to one job fair, I think, I don't know, like 15, 20, I don't know, 20 years ago, who knows? And I said I'd never go back to another one again. It was awful. So now as I'm starting to think about applying, and you see some schools do say just apply through our website, is it better to apply through the website when you know you'd like to go to a certain country or there's a certain school or curriculum you're interested in? Or do you wait knowing that they go to a certain job fair and sign up with Search or sign up with whoever is organizing the job fair and then know what jobs are available and go in that direction? Anyone have any advice on what's happening at the moment with how to apply and job fairs? And because last time I did it was probably 20 years ago.
A really fantastic question, honestly, Michelle, because I've thought that myself. I'm a direct to school girl. If I know I really want that certain school, I just apply direct. And I have sent speculative CVs as well of schools I really like the current one I'm in. But I know what you mean with the whole search thing. So they just going to choose people off search because it's easier. So yeah, it's a difficult one. I've been to a job fair recently, and I do believe that in person now in some places, I'm pretty sure I saw it, there was one in Dubai in person. I had the same experience at an in-person one, just so you know. It's awful. That was like a cattle market. But I went to an online one, I liked it because I got to see all the heads of the school talking, and it was interesting for me to see like what schools had women in leadership, what ones had, you know, mixed ethnicities. I really liked to see that. That was really interesting, but it still felt like the cattle market feel for me when I was online. You had to sort of register your card and you had to wait to be called up. And then actually my husband did get called up, and it was like a 3-minute conversation. He was off, you know. It's like, wow, you didn't know anything from him from that. So yeah, Lydia, I'd like your worldly advice on that as well. Is it better to use an agency, or would you use both, do you think?
Again, you know, if you've got a school that you want to be, or a location in, or friends working at that school, like Jess said, you know, make that direct connection with them would be my advice. And I say that, you know, from an honest perspective. Working with recruiters, and different recruiters do it differently as well. I think that's really important to notice. We as an organisation are quite small. We don't blanket send your CV out to schools. If you come to me and say I'm a primary teacher, I'll go anywhere. I mean, the worst thing that can happen is just a blanket send your school. You know, from a recruiter, what you will get through doing it through a recruiter is that certainly for us, we are working with schools that we know, and ultimately if we're sending you to a school, we know that we're going to get a response, and we know that the only reason why we will be sending you is because we know that that school is going to potentially be interested in you, which negates this whole cold sending, not getting any responses, the frustration that comes with that. But you know, agencies are really good to kind of get information from as well, you know, and current roles and responsibilities that are available within that school. You know, recruiters, we're in a position where we're really quite privy to receiving information from other teachers about other schools, you know, and of course we have to remain completely impartial, and we would, you know, you have to be careful what information you share, but certainly doing it through a recruiter, you know that certainly the way that we work, we'd only send to a school that we know that there's a community for you, and that you're going to fit in and help with the application process as well. We know we've been briefed by the schools, we know exactly what they're looking for. Whether or not you are that fit, we would only send through if you are, not setting people up to fail. So there's different ways. Fairs are great as well, you know, if it is your thing, then, you know, people who absolutely thrive off it. But then again, it is always nice to have, you know, to work with some agencies who, you know, they might be able to share with you their own experiences. And we had this issue this week. There was a couple who were based in Europe, and we talked to them about our China experience, and they kind of said, oh my gosh, wow, you know, I think we should give it a go. And, you know, perhaps you wouldn't have had that experience if they hadn't have spoken to a recruiter. So it's all about information sharing. Most definitely.
Right. Kelly has a similar question to the one Michelle just posted. So I think, Kelly, if you're still around, would you like to address the question about references, how far to go back on references? Oh, Kelly, are you there?
Can I jump in again? Because that was something I'm interested in, because of the current COVID situation and being out of school for, I think, like 2 years, basically. I've never even spoken to the head of the school now. I've never even seen him face to face. You know, nobody in senior leadership's been in my classroom for probably 3 years. So I'm just wondering, yeah, like, are the people that I currently work with and under, are they the right people to ask for a reference at this point, and how far back can one go?
Michelle, it's a really good question. You know, from certainly the schools that we're working with, it's almost part of their safeguarding process that they do require a written and sometimes a verbal from your current principal. And you know, and I completely get that. And again, it's frustrating because they might not necessarily know you as an individual, they might not have been in your classroom, but it is sometimes part of a you know, safeguarding protocol that school has in place. Someone else on there asked as well, it might have been yourself, Michelle, just about, you know, who should we have as a reference? People move about, and again, you know, that's what I mentioned earlier about making sure anybody that you use as one of your references, if you are including those contact details on the CV, make sure that they are accurate, make sure that they know that you're using them as a reference. you know, some of them, they don't have to be currently working at your school, you know, third, fourth references. They can be colleagues that you've worked with perhaps in a previous role and you were working alongside each other for quite some time. You know, if we can get as much of a bigger picture created from the references, then that's absolutely fine. But, you know, this idea of anybody being unwilling to give a reference from their current school, and it's not due to perhaps, you know, error or an issue, but it is, you know, schools do need that, because it is, again, it is just going to tick the box from a safeguarding perspective, most definitely. But again, you know, once they have that, that means that you can then just reach out to other people that you've worked alongside with in a managerial role, who will be able to, you know, offer a relevant reference for you.
All right, thanks, Lydia. I think we are running over time a little bit, but I think somebody had a question, had a hand up. Lena, was it you? Lena, do you want to unmute yourself?
Yes,
and I think that will be the last question for this session.
It was more a comment that Jess made, that I had a school ready pre-COVID and was going to move abroad, and then was just too frightened because I didn't know anything about the world situation, and that ended. And so I'm back, I'm starting the process again. So it will be my first step into international schools. And I was concerned, and Jess mentioned about the ethnicity and being in these fairs where I think it can be strange and about how you look rather than your skills. And that's something I've been worried about, actually, and also heard stories that aren't the most favorable, which is why I find no photos are better, because people can be judging based on appearance and skin color and those and gender, which I'm not a fan of. So I worry about those concerns, and Jess lightly touched on it. Comment.
Lena, I totally agree with you. And my thoughts on this is the true progressive schools would not be judging on those factors. And for myself, I would never, ever want to work in a school that judged on those factors. I had a little work, it's like I'm in one of the sites, the International School Teachers sites, and I had an uproar because I said I didn't want any more in job adverts the statement native speakers only, because I thought that was actually quite offensive. Especially when often second and third language, bilingual, trilingual speakers of English know English way better than I do. So those sort of comments and statements, they shouldn't be a concern anymore. Lots of schools have DEI statements, and you know, often there should be some sort of quota that everybody is covered. Like we know that females quite often aren't in leadership positions, but there's loads of great people that are supporting females now to get there, just like Philip. Lots of he for she people who are, you know, who are not that way inclined. Yay. And we hope it's changing. And, you know, there are examples of amazing teachers who have got jobs in international schools, such as Jaya, you know, and she's originally from India. And like my school, we have 3 sections, and there is a mix of nationalities. So it's trying to look out for those schools, and to be, like I said, to be quite honest, I fit the profile perhaps of what people feel should be the teacher, or parents might think might be the teacher that they want. I'm not blonde, I suppose. But personally, for me, I would never want to support schools like that. So it might be worth, if you're looking at a school and you're interested in school, I always look at the staff that hired. I look at the age range, because I want to know if there's families there, basically. I look at the balance of female to male, especially in leadership. I look at, you know, are multiple countries represented? And often they will say on the site, we have people highly trained in the national curriculum, but they're from Australia, they're from New Zealand, they're from South Africa. So it's looking out for those sort of comments. But I totally understand how you feel about that. But as far as I'm concerned, I see lots of changes from when I first started, 2009, working in international schools. And I'm hoping that the schools are getting more and more progressive. Lydia, do you want to add anything to that, or anyone else want to add anything to that?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, it's just the international schools, you know, this phrase international, it's just, you know, it's inclusive, it's all of this, you know, and for me as a recruiter, I see posts like the one Jess is referring to, and now I've, you know, it used to make my blood boil, and now I've learned to just scroll and breathe. And I guess, you know, it's just incredibly frustrating. And I think that, you know, schools are becoming more aware of it, and, you know, any school that you get a slight whiff of any kind of issues, you just have to back away from. And certainly for us, you know, we are a small organization. The due diligence that we do, you know, we have to be so careful, because it's our reputation as well that's at stake here, you know. And we're very, very grateful that the schools that we work with, you know, they do use this phrase international to, you know, as fully inclusive. Unfortunately, it does still take place, and you can see it in Facebook groups, you can see it on LinkedIn as well, which is baffles me how these posts don't get blocked and whatnot. But Lena, you know, you sound like you're pretty switched on, you're wanting to go international. Don't let any previous experience or any online reading hinder that, because honestly, hand on heart, it's the best thing that we ever did as individuals and as a family. So you'll find the right school, and it's instinct, isn't it? You know when you're speaking to a school if it's going to be as a block here or something, but you'll be absolutely fine, definitely. And as I say, please don't let any previous kind of experiences hinder going forward, because as I say, and I'm sure everyone on this thread will agree, it's the best thing most of us did.
Yeah, I'll just add something, Lena, as a person of color. Yes, it does exist. I'm not going to deny that. And I spent years and years thinking if I was taking it personally, but it's so covert, it's like microaggression sometimes. So and I'm not faced it directly as recruiting in a recruiting situation. I know somebody Sharing put in her experience where she went to an online job fair, and she was told that a recruiter told her on her face that they don't hire people from that, from her country. I haven't faced that, but I know it's there, it's out there. It's just that for me, just like Jess said, it's a way to weed out schools. And if they're not going to looking at my picture in my CV, if that creates an impression, in their head where they don't see me fit in, I feel, good riddance. I don't want to work in a school which doesn't want diversity, which is not ready to include me. Because when you go to a school, it's not just being hired. You have to fit in the community, and they have to be really inclusive. You have to have a seat at the table at the school. Socially, as a community, in leadership roles, you should be given an equal opportunity. So yes, it makes the pool smaller, but then there's a fairly large pool of international schools out there, and you have a great energy. I'm sure you'll find a good fit. All right, I think we have run over time, and apologies. Sorry, it's Lantern Festival, and so we have firecrackers going off in the city. Apologies if you had any questions which were not addressed, but we did, maybe Jess and Lydia could quickly give their or type in their email addresses in the chat if you could. So if anybody has any questions, you can address to them later. So thank you so much for being here and giving us your time. And I hope you took away something. I know we had some great sharing of expertise from Jillian, Philip, Jess, and Lydia. Thank you all for your valuable time as well. So Jess, do you have something to add before we?
Yeah, I just want to say thank you for everyone for turning up. There was a little bit problem with the Zoom links and such like. Some people have written on here, will there be a recording? Yes, there will. Unfortunately, I started just when Lydia started speaking, but I will re-record what I said myself and send that to WomenEd as well. They have a YouTube, which I can really recommend to look on. So it's got loads of career clinics and job advice, and they do upload. It can take a little bit of time, I'm afraid, but I will post on Twitter and I will post on our Facebook group when it uploads. If you're not on Twitter, please get on it. It's where we post mostly. So it's at WomenEd TW. And then we do have a Facebook group as well, WomenEd Taiwan, which Jessica very kindly keeps up with that one. I'm more on the Twitter. But yeah, we really appreciate you joining. If you have further questions, please contact me or Lydia. I put my information in the chat. Thank you, Jaya, for being the brilliant presenter that you are. And thank you, Jessica, for helping and supporting with letting people in. And Jessica is the wonderful creator of all our flyers, although she's very quiet about it and likes the backstreet. She is the masterpiece between the arty stuff that we do. So thank you, Jessica, as well. And yeah, I think we can sign off.
Okay.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.